The summer air hung heavy and sweet over Willow Creek, Ohio, a gentle hum of cicadas providing the evening's only soundtrack. Street lights cast long, sleepy shadows down Elmwood Avenue, painting the scene with a deceptive tranquility. It was the kind of night where you could almost taste peace, where the world seemed to settle into a contented sigh. And in the heart of that stillness, a sleek, dark sedan glided almost silently, its headlights cutting a smooth path through the encroaching dusk. Behind the wheel sat Sarah Jenkins. Her posture was relaxed, a hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other tapping a gentle rhythm on the dashboard to the low thrum of jazz. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the familiar suburban landscape, not with the absent gaze of a weary commuter, but with the honed precision of someone constantly processing, constantly analyzing. To any casual observer, Sarah was just a woman unwinding after a long day, perhaps heading home to a warm meal and a good book. But Sarah's days rarely ended with simple domesticity. Her work was a world of shadows and whispers, of meticulous observation and calculated risk. As a highly trained intelligence operative, the calm she exuded was a carefully cultivated facade, a fortress built against the chaos of her true calling. Tonight, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Her latest undercover assignment was reaching its delicate conclusion, the threads of a complex web finally starting to draw tight. Then, the world tilted. Not with a crash, but with a sudden piercing wail of a siren. Blue and red lights, stark and jarring, bloomed in her rearview mirror, pulsing with an aggressive urgency that instantly shattered the evening's peace. Sarah's hand didn't flinch. Her foot remained steady on the gas for another beat, but her internal gears shifted with lightning speed. Every nerve ending, every trained instinct snapped to attention. She eased the car to the curb, the gravel crunching beneath the tires like a harsh whisper against the night's silence. Two figures emerged from the patrol car, their silhouettes framed by the flashing lights. Officer Thorne, tall and impossibly authoritative, moved with a swagger, his hand already on his holster. Beside him, Officer Dubois, shorter and stocky, carried himself with a similar self-importance, a smirk already playing on his lips. "License and registration, ma'am," Thorne's voice cut through the air, deceptively polite, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of condescension. "You blew through that stop sign back there, Elmwood in Maine." Sarah, ever composed, handed over her documents. Her gaze met Thorne's, a quick, almost imperceptible flicker of something akin to recognition. It was the smile of a man who knew he was in control, a man who relished the subtle power he wielded in these twilight encounters. And in that moment, Sarah knew. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. The fabricated accusation was merely the flimsy curtain hiding the real act. She hadn't missed the stop sign. She drove that route every day, every turn, every signal memorized. No, this was something else entirely. It was a set-up, the kind she had seen before, the kind that disproportionately targeted people who looked like her. For too many black individuals in America, a routine traffic stop could quickly devolve into a nightmare of baseless accusations, unwarranted searches, and deeply unjust arrests. It was a lived reality, a historical echo that resonated through generations, a constant reminder of how easily authority could be weaponized. The psychological toll of such encounters was immense, chipping away at dignity, fueling a quiet rage even for someone as emotionally disciplined as Sarah. Then came the calculated escalation. Dubois, after a quick conspiratorial glance at Thorne, barked into his radio. "Got a strong hit on K9, Thorne. Looks like something's in the trunk." The words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement. Sarah felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. A beat later, Dubois was at her trunk, fiddling with the latch. "Mind if we just have a quick look, ma'am, just to be sure?" Thorne asked, his tone still outwardly polite. but his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. Sarah offered no resistance, her silence a calculated move. She knew consent wouldn't matter here. The script had already been written. Sure enough, Dubois pulled out an unmarked bag, slightly soiled, containing a suspiciously white, powdery substance. He held it up triumphantly, a theatrical flourish for the benefit of the night, for the benefit of the camera, for the benefit of Thorne. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he exclaimed, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "Looks like someone's got a little powdery goodness they forgot about, ma'am." Sarah's face remained impassive, her gaze unblinking. The bag was not hers. She had never seen it before. The certainty of it was absolute. This wasn't just bad policing. It was a meticulously planned ambush, designed to ensnare and humiliate. Inside, Sarah's mind raced, not in panic, but with the cold, precise calculations of a seasoned operative. Her internal clock registered every second, every word, every subtle shift in the officer's body language. She catalogued the details, the distinct pattern of the bag, the way Dubois had handled it, the fleeting glance Thorne had given the road just before the stop. There was no fear in her, only a sharp, instinctive warning. They had underestimated her, deeply. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips, not one of arrogance, but of quiet certainty. They thought they had trapped her, but they had merely initiated her own carefully orchestrated countermove. For in that moment, under the harsh glare of the patrol car lights, Sarah understood. Maintaining her dignity, her calm composure, wasn't just an act. It was the first, most powerful form of defiance against their carefully constructed lie. This game was just beginning, and they had no idea who they were truly playing against. The click of the handcuffs was sharp, metallic and final, a harsh punctuation mark to the quiet night. As they led her towards the patrol car, the world around Sarah seemed to fade, replaced by the humming thrum of her own internal readiness. The lure of the night, meant to ensnare her, had instead become the stage for a truth far more explosive than Thorne and Dubois could ever imagine. And as the back door of the patrol car closed, ushering her into the cold metal confines, Sarah knew that the true battle was about to begin. Deep within, the belly of the beast. The ride to the Willow Creek precinct was shrouded in a tense, vibrating silence. Outside, the world blurred into fleeting streaks of neon from passing storefronts, but inside the patrol car, the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the occasional, crackling static of the police radio. Sarah sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, a posture of outward resignation that belied the storm of analytical thought churning within her. Officer Thorne, glancing at her through the rearview mirror, offered a faint, condescending smirk. "You don't seem too worried," he ventured, his voice edged with a deliberate mockery. "Most folks are practically crying by now." Sarah met his gaze through the glass, her dark eyes steady, unflinching. "Should I be?" she replied, her voice a calm ripple in the manufactured tension. Thorne chuckled, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're either brave or stupid, lady. I've seen a lot of people act tough, but it never lasts long in the holding cell." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew men like Thorne all too well. Their type existed in every sphere of power, every dark corner where authority could be bent and twisted. They were used to control, to manipulating the narrative, to walking away without consequence. For now, she let him believe he was in charge. That illusion, she knew, wouldn't last. The Willow Creek Police Department, when they arrived, was a monument to functional decay. Fluorescent lights, unforgiving and stark, buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on scuffed linoleum floors and the peeling paint of the walls. It smelled faintly of stale coffee, disinfectant, and a deeper, unspoken exhaustion. "Got ourselves a big one tonight," Thorne announced, his voice loud and brash, echoing through the quiet station as they led Sarah inside. Other officers, lounging behind desks, sipping coffee, glanced up, their interest piqued. Officer Dubois, with a theatrical flourish, tossed the incriminating bag of powder onto the counter. "Caught her red-handed," he added, a smug triumph in his tone. "Looks like she's been running more than stop signs." Sarah remained silent, her gaze sweeping the room with the quiet intensity of a predator assessing its prey. She noted the precise placement of every surveillance camera, the seemingly casual layout of the desks, the easy, almost intimate camaraderie among the officers. This was a small station, the kind where everyone knew everyone, where a blue wall of silence wasn't just an unwritten rule, but an unspoken creed, a network of shared secrets and comfortable complicity. In such environments, systemic corruption wasn't an anomaly. It was the accepted norm, festering in the shadows where accountability was an inconvenient myth. They guided her to a fingerprinting station where Thorne finally removed the cuffs, motioning for her to place her hands on the ink pad. She complied without a word, her movements calm and deliberate. The officer working the station, a younger man with tired eyes named Officer Keller, hesitated as he glanced at her, as though sensing something profoundly out of place. "Name?" he asked, his tone almost apologetic, a subtle tremor of unease beneath the procedural query. "Serafina Jenkins," she replied evenly. "Occupation?" Keller pressed. Sarah paused, considering her answer. "Consultant," she said finally. It was vague enough to pass scrutiny, yet true enough to avoid outright deception. Keller nodded, continuing to type, his discomfort evident. Thorne and Dubois, meanwhile, leaned against the counter, laughing quietly, enjoying their preordained show, oblivious to the small spark of doubt they had inadvertently ignited in the rookie. Sarah's cell was cold and dimly lit, the metal bench bolted to the wall, offering little comfort. The bars cast long, oppressive shadows across the concrete floor, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant, irritating companion. She sat on the bench, her back ramrod straight, her posture unyielding. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing with finality through the quiet corridor. Thorne lingered for a moment, watching her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You don't look like the type to get mixed up in this kind of thing," he said, almost conversationally. "But don't worry, the courts love a good sob story. Maybe they'll go easy on you." Sarah tilted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto his. "Or maybe," she said, her tone calm but laced with an edge that made Thorne visibly shift, "they'll see through yours." He muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving her alone in the cell. Sarah leaned back against the cold metal wall, exhaling slowly. This was it. This was the moment. She knew her next steps had to be precise, meticulously calculated. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom. She was about to expose something much, much bigger. The quiet of the cell was broken only by the station's HVAC system. Sarah waited, her patience a testament to years in the field. She knew her absence wouldn't go unnoticed for long. Her team would find her. They always did. In the meantime, she had to play the part, the calm detainee, the unremarkable woman with nothing to hide. But every passing moment was another opportunity to observe, to gather information. She noted the distinct footsteps of the night shift officers as they passed her cell, their routines, their patterns. She listened for the faint beeping of the station's computers, the crackle of the radio, the subtle changes in the rhythm of the precinct. Every detail mattered. When the time came, she would be ready. The illusory walls of their control were about to crumble, and Sarah was preparing to deliver the first decisive blow. In the station's break room, the clatter of ceramic mugs and the easy flow of Thorne and Dubois' laughter painted a picture of routine, almost idyllic confidence. "She thinks she's untouchable," Dubois chuckled, shaking his head. "Did you see her face? Not even a flicker of panic." Thorne, leaning back in his chair, a satisfied smirk playing at his lips, added, "Yeah, well, that'll change. She's just another name in the system now. Nobody's going to dig too deep." Their voices, thick with a sense of untouchable power, echoed through the small space. "Besides," Dubois added, picking up a donut, "we've got everything we need. The evidence is airtight." But their confident banter was punctuated by a silent, growing discord. Officer Keller, the younger man from the processing desk, lingered nearby, his face pale, his eyes darting towards the holding cells. Something about the entire situation didn't sit right with him. He'd processed dozens of arrests in his few months on the job, but this one felt profoundly different. The suspect, Serafina Jenkins, hadn't acted like anyone Keller had ever seen. She wasn't defiant, not aggressive, and certainly not scared. Her calm demeanor, her deliberate words, they weren't normal. And then there was the bag of drugs. It was almost too convenient, sitting right there in the trunk like a neatly wrapped gift. Keller hesitated, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He knew the unwritten rules of the station. You didn't question senior officers, not Thorne, not Dubois. In this environment, questioning them wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. It could mark you, isolate you, or worse. Yet, the doubt gnawed at him, a persistent, uncomfortable itch he couldn't shake. He glanced at the surveillance monitors mounted above his desk, the live feed showing the hallway outside Sierra's cell. She was sitting on the bench, still as a statue, her expression unreadable. Keller bit his lip, a tiny spark of resolve, a flicker of conscience, igniting within him. While Keller wrestled with this internal war, Sarah remained utterly composed. Her hands rested casually in her lap, but her sharp eyes were trained on the camera positioned outside her cell. It was an old model, likely outdated and poorly maintained, a casualty of a budget that didn't prioritize state-of-the-art surveillance. She waited, her patience born of years spent in hostile environments. When the hallway was finally clear, she shifted slightly on the bench, her movements deliberate but subtle. Hidden in the hem of her jacket was a small, inconspicuous tracker, standard issue for intelligence operatives in the field. She pressed her hand against the fabric, triggering the device with a barely perceptible click. The tracker sent a silent signal, a beacon that would reach her team within moments. She didn't need to speak or explain. They would know what to do. Back in the break room, Thorne and Dubois were still sipping their coffee, their laughter filling the small space. "She's probably sitting in there thinking we're going to crack," Thorne said, shaking his head. "They always think they can talk their way out of it." Dubois chuckled. "Yeah, well, she's in for a rude awakening. This case is a slam dunk. We've got the drugs, the arrest report, and no witnesses. Nobody's coming to save her." Thorne leaned back, a satisfied grin on his face. "You know what I like about this job? The predictability. You see the same types over and over. They think they're smarter than us, but they never are." Their laughter echoed through the room, oblivious to the silent storm brewing just beyond their understanding. At a nearby nondescript office, a phone buzzed softly on a desk. A hand reached out to answer it. The voice on the other end, calm but authoritative, spoke. "Signal received. Location confirmed. Deploying resources." Sarah leaned her head back against the cold wall of her cell, her eyes closing for a brief moment. She could almost feel the gears turning, the quiet precision of her team mobilizing in the background. Every second that passed brought her closer to the inevitable reckoning. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no joy, only quiet certainty. The officers had no idea what was coming. The station bustled with its usual morning activity. Officers filing reports, answering calls, exchanging pleasantries over coffee. It was business as usual for everyone except Serafina Jenkins and the two men who had orchestrated her arrest. For Thorne and Dubois, today felt like a victory lap. Sarah sat motionless in her holding cell, her posture as composed as ever. Through the bars, she could see the edges of the station's activity, the occasional passing shadow, snippets of conversation. But she remained focused. She knew how to blend into the background when necessary, to make herself invisible until the exact moment when visibility mattered most. Her signal had been sent hours ago, and she trusted her team implicitly. But she also knew they wouldn't act immediately. Timing was critical. In the meantime, she needed to sow the seeds of doubt. At the front desk, Officer Keller's eyes darted toward the holding cell monitors again. Sarah hadn't moved much since her arrival, but something about her demeanor gnawed at him. It wasn't fear or defiance, two emotions he was accustomed to seeing in detainees. It was patience, a quiet confidence that seemed misplaced for someone accused of trafficking drugs. Unable to shake his unease, Keller pulled up her file on his computer. Her driver's license information and address were straightforward, but there was an unusual gap in her employment history. The system flagged her most recent job as independent consultant with no further details. Frowning, Keller minimized the file and glanced toward the break room, where Thorne and Dubois were laughing over donuts. Their carefree demeanor made his stomach churn. Against his better judgment, Keller decided to take a closer look at the arrest report. Clicking through the digital records, he scanned the narrative provided by Thorne and Dubois. Stopped for failure to yield at a marked intersection, Keller muttered under his breath, reading aloud. Driver exhibited nervous behavior during questioning. Consent to search granted. Controlled substances found in the trunk of the vehicle. Something didn't add up. He'd been trained to recognize patterns of deception, and while the report followed procedure on the surface, it felt too tidy, too scripted. Keller's internal conflict grew as the hours passed. He found himself pacing near the holding cells, glancing toward Sura's cell with increasing frequency. Finally, he worked up the courage to speak. "Miss Jenkins?" he said, stopping just outside the bars. Sarah looked up, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Yes?" Keller hesitated, his hand resting on his belt. I just wanted to ask, did you really consent to the search of your car?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the faint cracks in his resolve. "What do you think, Officer Keller?" she asked, her tone calm but pointed. Keller swallowed hard. I'm just doing my job," he said, his voice faltering. "That's what they're counting on," Sarah replied, her gaze steady. "Men like Thorne and Dubois, they rely on people like you to look the other way." Keller's face flushed, and he stepped back, stammering something unintelligible before retreating down the hall. But Sarah saw the hesitation in his steps, the conflict etched into his features. The seed had been planted. Meanwhile, in the heart of Willow Creek, a plain black sedan rolled to a stop outside a nondescript building. Inside, a man in a tailored suit stepped out, his movements deliberate. He was flanked by two other agents, their demeanor professional and alert. "ETA on extraction?" one of the agents asked as they entered the building. The man checked his watch, his expression unreadable. "We'll proceed when she gives the signal. For now, we watch." Inside a secure operations room, live feeds from the police station flickered across several monitors. One screen showed Sarah in her cell, sitting perfectly still. Another displayed the front desk, where Keller was visibly agitated, pacing back and forth. "Look like the kid's starting to crack," one agent observed. "Good," the man replied. "We'll use it when the time comes." In the break room, Thorne leaned back in his chair, sipping his third cup of coffee. "You see Keller earlier?" he said to Dubois. Kid looked like he'd seen a ghost. Dubois shrugged, shaking his head. Probably overthinking things. Fresh out of the academy, they always get jumpy around the first big case. Yeah, well, let's hope he doesn't start asking too many questions, Thorne said, his tone darkening. Dubois shrugged. Doesn't matter. The evidence is all there, and she's got no alibi. Even if he gets nosy, there's nothing he can prove. Thorne nodded, but a faint flicker of unease crossed his face. For the first time, he considered the possibility that Keller's doubts could be contagious. As the day wore on, the tension in the station began to rise. Sarah could feel it, an almost imperceptible shift in the air. She knew her team was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Keller's footsteps echoed down the hall again, slower this time. He paused outside her cell, his expression conflicted. You said, "They're counting on people like me," he said quietly. What did you mean by that? Sarah's gaze was steady. You know exactly what I mean, she said. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Keller stared at her for a long moment, before walking away, his shoulders tense. Back in the operations room, the suited man watched Keller's retreat on the monitor, a faint smile crossing his lips. He's close, he said. One more push. One of the agents glanced at him, and then the man's smile widened. Then we turn this whole thing upside down. Keller sat at his desk, his fingers drumming against the edge as he stared at his monitor. The digital file on Serafina Jenkins remained open. The words blurred as his mind churned. He felt a knot forming in his chest, a sensation that had been growing since the arrest. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He glanced toward the break room, where Thorne and Dubois were still laughing, their carefree attitudes grating against his unease. The station felt heavier than usual, the walls pressing in like a silent witness to something unspoken. Keller's thoughts wandered back to the holding cell, to Sarah's words. That's what they're counting on. Her voice had been calm, deliberate, as if she knew exactly what buttons to press. And maybe she did. But was she wrong? As the hours dragged on, Keller's doubt turned into quiet resolve. He needed answers, but he couldn't risk drawing attention to himself. His reputation as a rookie already made him a target for teasing. Any signs of insubordination could isolate him further. He waited until Thorne and Dubois left the room, then slipped into the records archive. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals. Keller logged into the system, his hands trembling slightly as he searched for past cases tied to Thorne and Dubois. Their names popped up repeatedly, attached to arrests that followed a disturbingly similar pattern. Minor traffic violations escalating into drug charges. Most of the defendants were people of color. Most were convicted. The knot in his chest tightened. Back in her cell, Sarah remained still, her body a picture of composure. She had spent years training her mind to thrive in moments like this, when the waiting was long and the stakes were high. Through the bars, she watched Keller's shadow move past her cell. His pacing slower now, his steps more deliberate. She could sense his conflict, the internal war waging within him. He was close, she knew. Close to breaking the cycle of blind loyalty that men like Thorne and Dubois relied on. She shifted slightly on the bench, letting her movements catch his attention. He stopped, turning to face her. "Officer Keller," she said, her voice soft but commanding. He hesitated, his hand gripping the edge of the wall as if it were a lifeline. "What?" he asked, his voice low, almost defensive. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Something that doesn't add up." Keller swallowed hard. "I can't." He stopped, his voice catching. "I'm just trying to do my job." "And what is your job exactly?" Sarah pressed. "To follow orders? To look the other way when you know something's wrong?" Keller's jaw tightened, his eyes darting down the hallway. "You don't understand how things work around here," he said. I understand more than you think, Sarah replied, her gaze unwavering. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to think you don't have a choice. But you do, Keller. You always have a choice. Keller walked away, but her words followed him like a shadow. He returned to his desk, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He stared at the list of cases tied to Thorne and Dubois, his stomach twisting with each new name he read. Finally, he made a decision. Keller opened a secure email channel and typed a message, his fingers moving faster as his resolve solidified. He attached the case files he had found, along with a note. To whom it may concern. There's something wrong in this station. I don't know who else to turn to. Please help. He hit send, his heart pounding as the message disappeared into the void. He didn't know who would receive it, or if they would even care, but it was the first step toward doing what he knew was right. In the break room, Thorne leaned back in his chair, his coffee cup resting on his knee. You notice Keller acting weird today? He asked, glancing at Dubois. Dubois shrugged. Kid's always weird. What's he going to do? Rat us out? Thorne smirked, but his eyes narrowed. Still, keep an eye on him. Last thing we need is some rookie poking his nose where it doesn't belong. That afternoon, as the station hummed with activity, a nondescript black sedan pulled into the lot. Inside the car, Sarah's team prepared for their next move. They had intercepted Keller's email exactly as planned, and now they had what they needed to proceed. Let's make this clean, the team leader said, adjusting his tie. No unnecessary disruptions. We need to expose this from the inside. As they stepped out of the car, the sun glinted off their badges. FBI. Inside her cell, Sarah smiled faintly as the door to the station opened and the agents walked in. She couldn't see them from her vantage point, but she didn't need to. She knew her team had arrived. The storm was no longer brewing. It was here. The hum of the Willow Creek station fell into an awkward, immediate silence as the front doors opened. The agents stepped inside, their movements measured, their black suits crisp, and their badges gleaming under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. The one in the lead, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression, approached the front desk, his eyes scanning the room with quiet, practiced authority. Officer Keller, seated nearby, froze mid-typing. His heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was fear or relief, or a dizzying combination of both. He watched as the lead agent leaned slightly over the desk, speaking low enough that the surrounding officers couldn't hear. The desk sergeant, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, straightened up, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio on his shoulder. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice wary, a challenge barely disguised. "Federal investigation," the agent replied, his voice steady and clipped. "We need access to your records and holding cells immediately." The sergeant hesitated, his brow furrowing as he exchanged a glance with a nearby officer. The FBI's sudden arrival was unusual, disruptive even, but there was no protocol for outright denial. "Fine," he muttered, gesturing toward the hallway. "Follow me." From his desk, Keller watched the exchange, his palms slick with sweat. He knew deep down that the email he'd sent had triggered this, but he hadn't expected a response so soon or so visible. His gaze flicked toward Thorne and Dubois, who were standing near the break room door. Their laughter had died, replaced by hushed whispers and furrowed brows. Thorne's eyes locked onto Keller for a split second, and the rookie quickly looked away, focusing on his screen. The air in the station had changed, thick with a tension that felt almost suffocating. Agent Daniel Price, the lead investigator, stepped into a small, dimly lit interrogation room with his team. A second agent rolled a cart, carrying a portable server and several hard drives. They wasted no time, plugging into the station's network and beginning to sift through its digital archives. Price leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, watching as lines of code and file names scrolled across the monitor. "Anything?" he asked. The tech agent, a younger woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "Plenty. Their case files are riddled with inconsistencies. Repeated arrests, identical narratives, gaps in procedure. This isn't just bad policing, it's systemic." Price's jaw tightened. "Pull everything. I want every record, every report, and every piece of evidence tied to those two." In her cell, Sarah heard the faint murmur of activity beyond the hallway. She could feel the shift, the subtle ripple that signaled her team's presence. The waiting was almost over. She shifted slightly on the bench, her hands resting on her lap. The cuffs she'd worn earlier had left faint red marks on her wrists, but she didn't pay them any mind. Her focus was on the moment ahead, the moment when the truth would no longer be hidden. In the break room, Thorne paced back and forth, his coffee forgotten on the counter. Dubois leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, watching his partner with a growing sense of unease. "You think this is about her?" Dubois asked finally, his voice low. Thorne stopped, glaring at him. "Of course it's about her. Why else would the feds be here?" Dubois shifted uncomfortably. "You think they know?" Thorne scoffed, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Know what? There's nothing to know. Everything we did was by the book." "Yeah," Dubois muttered. "Sure." Agent Price emerged from the interrogation room, flanked by two other agents. He carried a folder filled with printed reports, the weight of evidence in his hands. He made his way through the station, his expression unreadable as he approached the bullpen. His gaze locked onto Thorne and Dubois, who froze mid-conversation. The agents moved with purpose, positioning themselves like sentinels around the room. "Officers Brandon Thorne and Mark Dubois," Price said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "We need to speak with you." Thorne tried to play it cool, forcing a smirk as he stepped forward. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone casual. "We've got nothing to hide." Price didn't blink. "Good. Then you won't mind answering a few questions." The room fell silent as the agents led the two officers toward the same interrogation room they had occupied moments earlier. Keller watched the scene unfold, his heart pounding. He could see the cracks forming in Thorne's facade, the tension in Dubois' shoulders. The once confident duo now looked more like cornered animals. Minutes later, another agent arrived at Sarah's cell. The door buzzed open, and the agent stepped inside, his face neutral but his tone respectful. "Sarah Della." "Miss Jenkins," he said, "you're free to go." Sarah stood, her movements smooth and deliberate. She met the agent's gaze, nodding slightly as she stepped out of the cell. The hallway seemed brighter now, the oppressive weight of the station lifting as she walked toward the front desk. As Sarah passed by Keller's desk, their eyes met briefly. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated, the words caught in his throat. She stopped, turning to face him fully. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying an unspoken understanding. Keller's chest tightened. He gave a small nod, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time since joining the force, he felt like he had done something that mattered. The interrogation room doors closed behind Thorne and Dubois, and the sound of raised voices soon followed. Sarah watched from the station's entrance as the agents methodically dismantled the officers' lies. The storm she had waited for was finally here, and it was only the beginning. Inside the cramped interrogation room, Thorne and Dubois sat at a small metal table, their postures stiff, their faces now stripped of their earlier bravado. Agent Daniel Price stood across from them, his hands resting on a stack of documents. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead light. "So," Price began, his tone measured, calm, yet undeniably powerful. "Do you want to start with the arrest report? Or should we jump straight to the planted evidence?" Dubois flinched, his eyes darting toward Thorne, a nervous tremor in his hands. "We don't know what you're talking about," Thorne said firmly, his voice laced with defiance, but lacking its usual conviction. Price didn't flinch. Instead, he opened the folder, pulling out a series of printed photos. He slid them across the table, one by one. Images from the station security cameras clearly showed Thorne and Dubois holding the unmarked bag before Sarah's car was searched. Thorne's jaw tightened, but he tried to maintain his composure. That doesn't prove anything, he insisted. We were securing evidence. Price raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. Really? Because these timestamps show otherwise. And we have audio recordings, courtesy of Ms. Jenkins's hidden surveillance device, capturing your little conversation about how easy it would be to frame her. Dubois paled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You can't use that, he sputtered. That's entrapment. Price smirked, shaking his head. No, it's justice. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. We've pulled records from your past arrests. Dozens of cases with eerily similar patterns. All of them are under review. But let me make one thing clear. You're not walking out of here today. Thorne's bravado began to crumble, his shoulders sagging. Dubois buried his face in his hands, the crushing weight of their actions finally hitting him. The smug confidence that had defined them for so long was replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of their situation. Meanwhile, in the bullpen, Officer Keller sat at his desk, watching the scene unfold. He had been called into the interrogation room earlier to confirm details about the station's processes, his quiet integrity a stark contrast to the crumbling edifice of Thorne and Dubois' lies. For the first time, he felt the heavy gaze of Thorne and Dubois as they realized someone from within had spoken out. As the agents returned to the bullpen, Keller stood, his hands trembling slightly. He approached Agent Price, clearing his throat. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Price looked at him, his expression softening slightly. "Now we clean house. And you," he paused, studying Keller's face. "You did the right thing." Keller nodded, a small wave of profound relief washing over him. For the first time since joining the force, he felt a true sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that surpassed any fear of reprisal. Sarah stood near the station's entrance, watching as Thorne and Dubois were led out in handcuffs. The once arrogant officers now looked defeated, their eyes downcast as they were escorted past their stunned colleagues. The station buzzed with quiet murmurs, officers exchanging glances, the reality of the situation sinking in. Agent Price approached Sarah, his expression neutral but respectful. "We've got everything we need," he said. "Your work here is done." Sarah nodded, her composure unbroken. "Good. Make sure it sticks." Price smiled faintly. "It will." As Sarah stepped outside, the crisp Ohio air hit her face, carrying with it a profound sense of finality. The invisible weight she had carried for weeks began to lift, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice, in this instance, had been served. The storm she had waited for had arrived, not in a chaotic explosion, but in the meticulous dismantling of a carefully constructed lie. And as she looked back at the station, knowing the truth had finally prevailed, she understood a fundamental lesson. The walls built by deception, no matter how strong they appear, are always vulnerable to the persistent, quiet force of truth. This wasn't just the end of an assignment. It was a testament to the enduring power of integrity in a system often shrouded by shadow. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think, made you feel, then please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the incredible human spirit. Your support helps us amplify these crucial stories. Thank you for listening.